Welcome to Civil Discourse, a podcast where participants are free to share their ideas, empathize with other perspectives, and who intend to advance to a better solution to fix a societal ill. We will focus on topics that are particularly complicated. In a time where information is from sources more opinionated than ever, our mission is to find solutions and goals to accelerate the nation's progress with cultural impunity. I'm your host, Todd Furniss. Trying to circle back, and it's not easy hearing stories like that, but trying to circle back to your story. Going back, you decided to film a TED Talk. You gave the message at the event. What happened? How was that received? And what was the message, that you could give in that environment?
The original speech in San Francisco was actually a much longer speech. In fact, it actually was closer to an hour, maybe 45 minutes or so. I had audio and video segments of that added some both color and shape to the story. But the people in the audience started crying. So and then we had cocktails afterwards. It was this reception. It was in a law firm environment, but people were very interested in staying around and talking. And so the guests stood around in this San Francisco environment, which was in person, for 2 hours, and we were all telling stories, and people wanted to tell their own stories. And similarly, when I gave this speech in April at a virtual conference, and it was much more of a TED style format, so I pared it down to essentially 20 minutes. I had so many friends and acquaintances, people I've known for a long time professionally, because this was a professional environment, not exclusively law firms, but professionals and people I've been, friends on Facebook or certainly LinkedIn contacts and things like that over the years, reached out to me, and we scheduled a Zoom discussion, and they wanted to tell their stories. And so some people I've known very well, shared things that they've never told anyone else. And I believe what happened is that in me, they saw a strong woman, someone who's had a certain degree of success that they also had and that they enjoyed, but they still had this story that they'd never shared with anybody.
So your act of courage, essentially, because it took an immense amount of courage, and that should not be understated at all, just an immense amount of courage to go up and talk about this, gave them permission, essentially, to share and say, hey, it's okay, it is possible. And one might argue it's more than possible, but it's possible to be both strong and vulnerable, and to have had that vulnerability compromised by trusted people, and talk about the horrors of that and the long-term implications of that. Was there any negative feedback you got?
No, and in today's world of quick run to judgment and moral indignation and all of these different feelings that people have so publicly today, I have not gotten any negative feedback at all. Not one comment at all even on YouTube, no down thumbs. So it's, yay for that. I think if I did receive that, I would take it as someone who just wasn't ready to own their own story. I think anyone because my entire message is that there is an opportunity to step out of the deep end of shame and see the light of day. And that's where the sunny side of shame comes in. But you have to own it, and you have to own all of the bad that you associate with it, and just find a way to move through it. And generally the way through it is just one step at a time.
So talk about that for a little bit. When you say you need to own the shame, that's a very, very big, enormous sentence with a lot of gravity, kind of the size of Jupiter. So tell me what you mean by own the shame.
Well, first there has to be a recognition that there is something that is holding you back. And what I see a lot, and have seen my entire career, particularly working with lawyers, high-performing people, really high-performing, high-potential professionals, is that many of them are unhappy. Many of them aren't, which is great, but many are unhappy, and many are sort of hindered or aren't as successful as they think they should be. I have seen that a lot, where they look kind of longingly at the rainmaker in their firm and say, well, Todd is so great at that. Why can't I be like that? And they assume, well, Todd's an extrovert, I'm an introvert, that must be the reason. And so they put sort of labels on themselves, which may or may not be true. And ultimately they start limiting themselves. They start self-editing in a way that is a highly unproductive, and ultimately is a complete, sabotages their potential for success. And they don't even know they're doing it, because I call it a false self. By anyone's standards, I was successful, but I felt like I wasn't deserving of the success, or I felt like, not because I didn't work hard, because I completely did work hard, but it was that underlying feeling of, I'm just not quite good enough to have this level of success. I'm not. And it's
link that back to shame and the events when you were 4. How does that correlate? Why does that make you not worthy?
I think because there was this underlying, I don't know what the word is, this underlying belief that, certainly for years I had that belief, and then I logically no longer had it, but I think emotionally I still had it, that feeling of being dirty, or feeling like I was imperfect, and surely there must be something wrong with me if somebody did that to me.
In other words, maybe you weren't deserving of safety, you weren't deserving of respect, you weren't deserving of your own personal space and your boundaries, and you also weren't deserving of the right to tell the story that you had been violated to even your parents. Is that kind of all part of this, the makeup?
I think it is. And I think as it relates to boundaries, the concept of boundaries is a very interesting one, because I felt like I had none. I had no boundaries. And I think that is not an uncommon feeling, that people grow up, people with any kind of a shame story, or who grow up feeling like a misfit or feeling other. The boundary system that seems so clear to some people and families, I just didn't have that. And they were, so consequently, I always found myself, even professionally, in settings where there was someone or sort of an organizational morality that was coming closer than it should, was making advances in some way or trying to exert influence or power over or something like that. And I just didn't have a sense that I had any permission at all to challenge it. So I found myself kind of dancing around it, to just keep myself standing and keep myself, doing my job and keeping relationships going and everything else. I just found, and again, that false self was very, amoebic in kind of a way, because it kept morphing from one, okay, I had to be this person here, but then I had to be this person over here. And so it wasn't just one false self I was trying to keep track of. There were more than one, depending on what the boundary structure or lack of boundary structure was.
So you almost had to be a psychological and emotional chameleon, changing your colors depending upon the environment in which you were then existing.